On this episode of Narcissist Apocalypse, we talk with an abuse survivor named Athena. And Athena was in a relationship with a calculated predator. It's a story of feeling chosen, manipulation, grandiosity, surveillance, cult dynamics, and stalking. Welcome to Narcissist Apocalypse, everyone. I am Brandon Chadwick, and with me today we have Athena. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. How are you?
I am doing well. Thank you for asking. And if you want to be a guest like Athena is today, please do go to our website at narcissistapocalypse.com, fill out our guest form, and we will go from there. Also, at our website, we have a support group with Zoom meetings every Wednesday nights, Thursday afternoons, and Saturday nights. And we have a newsletter as well at our website where you get a free reflection workbook for every new survivor's story. And that is a weekly newsletter, all at narcissistapocalypse.com. And we do have a content warning for this episode as we do discuss sexual assault and death threats in this episode. And today you're going to hear Athena's story, and Athena re-met her abuser when she was in a very vulnerable position, and this abuser took advantage of that in every single way, saying the right things to pull Athena into his world. And her abuser was someone who really thought of himself as a godlike figure, and there are so many elements of cult-like dynamics at play in her story, and we're just happy that Athena is alive to share her story today. She's going to validate so many of you out there today, and now I'm going to get out of my way and your way. Athena, the floor is now yours.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for bringing me. And I'm really thrilled to share my story, both to help other people, but also because I strongly believe that coming out of the silence is actually healing for me. And I can start a little bit by talking about how I got into this issue of ending up with this particular person. When I was around 10, I lost my mom, who I was very, very close to. She was very loving and a child psychologist. She even wrote her master's thesis on the mother-child connection during breastfeeding. And I was pretty devastated losing her. And she died from a combination of domestic violence, illness, and then I didn't find it out until later, but she committed suicide because of those things. And that kind of left a big hole in my life. And when I was in high school, I met this guy who was amazing. He was brilliant and loving and just like full of sparkles and cuddles. And unfortunately, after about a year, I found out that he had been using drugs and he checked himself into a drug rehab and then also took his life. And so I was pretty lost and I didn't have much support. I was fostered by my dad's parents in grade school. And after my mom died, I met my absentee dad, who was a teen psychologist. I got engaged at 19 to a pre-med student, and then I disconnected from my dad at 21. My breakup was pretty bad with my fiance, the pre-med student, and my dad just really didn't show up. So I had virtually no family after that as an adult, and I was free to do whatever I wanted, but I was really vulnerable with no support. And I ended up turning to activism for meaning and found a place to put my passion and a little bit of a community. And I successfully co-led a fight against the national nuclear waste dump at age 23. And that was exciting. And it lifted me out of a deep depression from all those losses. But at age 30, I suffered a major setback with my health. I developed severe Lyme disease and was disabled for years from it. And I basically went bankrupt, and I was living with a guy who I had just met at the hot springs, and he let me live there for free, and I was just really economically destitute from all the medical bills. And yeah, it created a crisis in my life. The Lyme did that really threw me into the arms of my husband next. And when I met my husband, I was really ill, and he was initially very caring, and his company's health insurance started to finally cover the Lyme treatments that I needed after 4 years of disability. But let's say later in the relationship, towards the end, my husband nearly took my life twice and became really abusive while he was using drugs at the end and set my expectations really low for my next relationship with the ex that I will be talking about, the subject of the podcast.
So before we get to that person and the meeting of this person, you're just coming right now from a background growing up with no stability, a lack of love. Your mom dies by suicide. There could be abandonment stuff going on here. And when your dad does enter the picture, he is neglectful and into himself. You have health issues going on. You do not have a lot of money. You have no help. And then you get into a marriage where someone does have medical insurance, which is helpful in a way, but this person is abusive as well. And then once again, you are on your own and you are alone. And this is a lot to deal with. So when it comes to your self-esteem and how you're viewing yourself and what your future looks like, are you thinking to yourself right now, this is going to be a fresh start? Or are you feeling like bad things just happened to me and maybe I deserve them?
I think I did kind of have that feeling like bad things were happening to me. And I didn't know at the time, but I had a genetic immune deficiency that was undiagnosed. And so I just kept getting sick over and over again. And I got sick from mold in the house that my husband created, the mold in the house. And then I got COVID really bad. And I just kept getting these infections and also like meeting men who would rescue me. And I was very vulnerable and I like needed the help. But I think in general, I was like feeling very insecure about life. Like life just didn't want to support me. And that I just didn't have like a lot of people around that would have my back. You know, when the floor drops out, if you don't have a family, that's actually from what I've been told, like the number one reason people become homeless is they don't have a family. It's not drugs or something else. And so I think I would say generally my self-esteem was pretty good, but I did feel like coming out of the divorce that I don't know, I felt like I was discarded by my husband for being sick. And I think my self esteem took a huge hit from that. And I think anybody giving me attention at that time was very welcome. So the ex and I met in 2010 at a number of conferences and retreats around currency and economics. I had been working in currencies and he had too. And he was kind of shy and aloof, but seemed a little interested. And he was generally regarded as very, very intelligent and a leader in the field. And he asked me out one time after a conference, but I had just started dating my husband. So I didn't show up. And we stayed passive Facebook friends for a while, really for 10 years. And I think he just watched and waited for just the right moment to enter. And then in the fall of 2020, I was at another really low point. I had been car camping for about 6 months to recover from mold illness at my husband's house. And I had gotten COVID and I had this brutal divorce. And I had been living in my car to afford all these fancy treatments like stem cells, IVs, and other experimental treatments. And then I made a post on Facebook asking for help. And he reached out and said the perfect thing, like exactly what I wanted to hear. He said, "How can I help?" And then he just offered housing in his fancy new camper. He offered food, gas, and maybe a job. And he said he wanted to be traveling partners. And I was just so thrilled because that was like everything that I wanted already. But also he layered on top of that he started sending me messages saying he felt a growing heart connection and that he was having dreams about me. And I became kind of entranced and thought that he was falling in love. And I thought I was falling in love too, just magically from a distance, even though we hadn't really spent time together. And I felt really special. And then, he asked to meet up in the winter of 2021. And he said that he would meet up wherever I would be. And so we settled on connecting at his mom's house in Southern Oregon. And the first day that we met up, we entered the house and then we sat down on the couch at his mom's. And he started asking me about my trauma right away and what had happened to my family. And I just cried in his arms and we held hands and we talked for hours. And he asked questions and listened really well, especially to the sort of harrowing story about how I left my ex husband. And he was filling the role of a therapist. I didn't have a therapist at the time, so he was like kind of my trauma therapist. And I didn't understand at the time, but he was collecting sort of information from these vulnerable conversations to use against me and control me, particularly around my mom's death and my divorce. But I would say, like, within the first hour, he offered to be my family and he said he would be my protector and that he would never leave and that I could always lean on him for emotional, financial support. And I thought that was strange and kind of inappropriate, but also like really sweet and like exactly what I wanted to hear. He also said that he regularly liked to help sick and vulnerable women. And it was just something that he did out of the goodness of his heart. And I would say also like I felt an intellectual connection around our common interests and social change and economics that was real and kind of a growing spiritual connection. He made me feel really chosen and he offered everything that I needed at that point: family, spiritual connection, support, belonging. And I think I had this deep longing after everything that I had been through that was really traumatic and heartbreaking that there would be this kind of redemptive fairy tale, which he was offering. And I didn't realize that he was like intentionally offering these missing pieces that he had so quickly assessed to basically to control me, as I think he's like a very calculating predator and has done this many, many times. He has his game down.
So eventually there were some red flags. So tell us about these red flags that were mixed with a lot of excitement and magical stuff that was going on.
I would say even the magical stuff was should have been a red flag because immediately I was like, "Oh, we have this special connection," and I feel so many butterflies. But also there were like very clear red flags right away, which I would say like in other relationships with similar people, I hadn't felt them so clearly right away. But he did attempt to track me and control me. Like from the first few days, he put me on Google Maps tracking, which seemed kind of reasonable because we were traveling together. But then also he asked to replace my phone and my phone plan, which I already had a better phone and phone plan. And then he also tried to buy my car from me and put the title in his friend's under his friend's name and have them loan it back to me and give them cryptocurrency in this whole scheme. And basically I wouldn't own my car anymore, which I owned fully outright. And I said no to that. And it seems sweet again at the time, like he was trying to help and protect me, but also a little bit concerning. He also, I say, within the first couple days, he disclosed childhood sexual trauma. And I just, I shared my similar but not as dramatic story. And we just kind of bonded over that. And I felt like I really empathized with the wounded inner child in him over that. And that kind of set the stage for my unconditional empathy and really excusing the abuse that would follow. He was very cuddly and warm sometimes, but also wanted sex right away. And there was a red flag with that too. The first night that we were together, he had sex with me while I was actually totally asleep. And I woke up to him having sex with me, and he bit me so hard that I thought he had injured me. And he also had unprotected sex with me when I probably would have refused if I had known what he was doing. But he said he was a monk and he hadn't had sex for years, which turned out to be absolutely not the case. He's like a sex addict. But even then, it was just like he was pushing through boundaries so quickly and also saying things like he didn't want to have any labels and like no kiss and tell. And that I couldn't be his girlfriend because he'd never had a girlfriend, which turned out again to be totally untrue. He actually had current partners around the world. And I tried to split off after the first week. I felt scared and concerned, and they did break it off temporarily and like actually went off GPS and thought about it, like not coming back at all.
But eventually he does talk you into coming back. So what happens from here?
We traveled south together in his camper and we started to meet his friends and I started to learn more about him. He didn't, I don't think he was particularly vulnerable, but he did tell me some details about his growing up in his life. And he talked about his mom a little bit, that she was cold and kind of narcissistic, but also that his parents started multiple Montessori schools for him. Why multiple? I don't know. But they were also really big into Christian Science, which he had kind of disconnected from, but also felt it seemed like he felt chosen by God through that religion and felt like it was like a really special part of him and that he and that actually being part of that religion made him really special. And in his teen years, he had a spiritual epiphany to not get romantically attached. And that made him, I think he thought that made him like emotionally superior, that he didn't have to get attached. He could just have all these relationships, and that he wouldn't feel the trappings of being human, where we get emotionally connected and then devastated. And he also posed himself as like a sexual healer, but he did have like a kind of a mystique to him, and actually set up a clinic with a shingle and everything and charged people for being a sexual healer. Another red flag was that he was apparently a wisdom teacher through Landmark. And I had heard things about Landmark. I know people have good experiences, but other people said that it was part of a cult. And he studied NLP, and it seemed like he had studied a lot about dark psychology. He also mentioned that he wanted to start a cult called the Church of the Upward Spiral with like a whole campus. And he was like looking at campuses, trying to find compounds and castles where he might host this Church of the Upward Spiral. He was also really obsessed with comic superhero movies and just regular superheroes. And he seemed to really view himself as one of them, and like a hero of women in particular. And this was kind of mixed. All this magical stuff was mixed with real things. Like, he is a world-renowned tech inventor. He has invented a peer-to-peer internet successor and the blockchain. He's invented currencies, and many people still regard him as kind of a tech messiah. It's within a niche, but he definitely is famous and like has a lot of social media followers. And I would say he was a pathological liar. So it's hard to know what was true, but there were clearly things that were true. I mean, he definitely was a genius. He could remember sheet music from 20 years before by heart. He could solve crossword puzzles by just looking at them at a glance. But then he would also mix in these things, like he would see a symbol on a store that was like a mysterious symbol. I didn't know what it meant. And he would say, "Oh, I know what that means." And he'd just kind of like meditate for a bit and say that he channeled the information from the universe. And I think he was just making up what the symbol meant. And as a tech genius, he had many followers and admirers. He had people that, as we traveled around, seemed to really worship him and invested in him and catered to him. We would stay at their homes, and they would make fancy meals and entertain us. And then he would make these promises, and some of them were real, I think, and some of them were false promises that he would actually tell me that he would want to offer them work, investment returns, and other forms of reciprocity. There was one couple who he offered work to, and then later told me that he wasn't really interested in giving them work, that they just weren't cut out. But we stayed there for weeks, and they offered all these things. And then there was another couple that was part of the Landmark community who he offered to let use his camper to drive to Canada to go to a wedding. And I thought that was kind of crazy, because it was like his home and they were going to drive thousands of miles. And then I later asked him about it, and he was like, "I don't know what you're talking about." And I realized he just didn't even, it was a total joke. He was just trying to get stuff out of them. And they had hosted myself and him and two other women for weeks under the guise that he was going to lend them the home, and also probably just to be close to this kind of famous guy. There was another fan that we met. He had just met, and he hosted us twice in a month. And the guy took out a loan to invest in his company, and then his investment later tanked because the ex basically pulled his shares, and he knew all of that, and he still let it happen. And I really think he thought these people just owed him stuff just to be close to someone so brilliant and special. There was one time when he was clear that that's how he felt about me too. He said, "Don't you just feel excited to exchange fluids with such a famous person?"
Hi, everyone. If you've been listening to Narcissist Apocalypse for a long time, you probably know I haven't done host-read ads in years. And that's because all I really have with you is trust. So as time has gone on, I become more careful about what I bring to the show, especially because survivors deserve care from people who understand trauma and aren't treating it like some side issue. That's why I wanted to tell you about Rebound Therapy. Rebound offers specialized virtual treatment for people ready to work through past trauma and reclaim their lives. What stood out to me is that their therapists are carefully vetted and trained in evidence-based treatment. They pair their clinical expertise with deep support from survivor advocates who have lived experience to support your healing process between sessions. It's covered by many major insurance plans like Athena, many Blue Cross Blue Shield plans, and more. Head to hellorebound.com/NA to check your insurance or get matched with a therapist. I'll also put the link in the episode description. So the person that you are in this relationship with is very much sounding like he wants to be the leader of a cult. He even wants to start his own cult, as he said. But other things, he's saying he feels chosen by God, that he feels special, and he's emotionally superior. He sees himself as a superhero. And with you, as far as recruitment of you, he's kind of doing culty things. He hears all your trauma, tells you that, you are his family now, or that he is your family now. And he's just saying and doing all of the right things to get you on board. Very helpful. Also saying that there's no kiss and tell, so he's isolating you from talking to others. He has people around him who see him as a certain figure and kind of worship him. And this is just the beginning of this cult-like behavior. And at the same time, you are seeing a mixed bag of things. Good and bad things have happened. In one way, you're being taken care of, but in another way, you're already being abused. There's boundary pushing, sexual assault. You are seeing behind the wizard's curtain here. You're watching him with other people, and you're seeing how he is acting here. He's using other people. So you're kind of in this world here that is very unique to anything that you've been part of before. And there's just a lot of stuff going on. So how are you making sense of it? And how are you rationalizing everything that's going on? Because it is a whirlwind. So can you just explain, what is happening with you during this time and all of your feelings about it?
I did feel like kind of swept up, as you articulated, like by the whole scene, meeting these kind of semi-famous people that he was associated with. And he would go on these trips to Europe suddenly, or people would invite him to like really big events and things. And I just felt like, I felt kind of special because of all that. But I think really I wanted to do something different with him. And I sense this wounded child in him that really wanted to be seen for himself and not just for his work or for the fame or the money or whatever. And I really tried to tap into that and develop a special relationship with who I felt was like the true person that I was spending time with. And I think he really did feel that too and like appreciated it, but it was probably like a little bit disarming, a little uncomfortable to feel that level of intimacy. And for me, that was my hook into the relationship, the special person who would really gain a level of intimacy that nobody else had with him. And I didn't just want to connect with the famous person, but I also felt like it connected with my own, traumatic childhood. And I think he set that anchor in right away. And I think because of that, I gave him a lot of leeway to cross over boundaries. One of the ways that he crossed boundaries is he did this hot and cold thing. And he even said, when I called him out on it, I was like, I feel like you're really doing hot and cold. And I'd never accused of anybody of this before, but he said that he was doing it intentionally to control so that I wouldn't ask for too much from the relationship. And yeah, there were other controlling behaviors. He made the rules, the decisions, kind of created the emotional tone for the day, controlled the status of the relationship. And as I mentioned before, like telling me that I wasn't his girlfriend, but telling sometimes other people that I was his girlfriend. He wouldn't talk about his other partners most of the time. But then I would like randomly find out he would like be making a phone call in front of me, trying to make plans. Sometimes he would control me by using withdrawal of sex as a punishment. And then he would offer it back if he did something wrong or to soothe me. And that would create a stronger trauma bond. And I initiated a conversation with him about boundaries, and he just kind of excused it by saying he was abused as a child. So I gave him much more leeway than I had ever given anybody by far that I have had ever dated because of this childhood abuse. And I was really confused by that, honestly. I was like, why am I letting him run all over me in all these various parts of the relationship, including like he would triangulate me with other women. He tried to make me jealous, and I'm not a particularly jealous person, but some of this was kind of triggering. He hid this relationship he was developing with a board member on his foundation, and at one point he made me massage the board member after I found out that they were dating, and he ended up triangulating me with that board member's best friend who he hired for a project, and then tried to get with her. And when she said no, he triangulated us as well. And he would do this with various people. And I think it more than making me jealous, he was trying to control me, trying to control how I felt about myself, that I would feel lower self esteem and then be more beholden to him. Another time, he triangulated me with this shaman lady he had started dating again after many years, and asked her to do an all-day healing ceremony for me. And I was like, oh, that's so sweet. And then I found out as I started talking with her that he had started dating her again. He didn't tell me that, and he didn't tell her either. And so we found out while we were trying to bond over me being sick and her helping me. And that one, I would say, broke my heart a little bit. Yeah. And then, he introduced me to his network of prominent friends, but when he would ask them to help me, and none of them actually did. So I would be kind of like future faked even by his friends, and he would future fake me with promises of trips and having this community together on one of these campuses for the cult, and offering me, like a job and cryptocurrency and all these things. But in the end, they were all just future fakes. And he would sometimes even admit that he was just doing it to manipulate me, to get me to do what he wanted. And he just seemed to like really, really have this whole game down of like figuring out exactly what I needed and then pretending to give it to me and then like taking it away, or starting to give it to me and taking it away.
So you're being strung along here, and he's doing it as a dangling carrot, and it is a form of control to get you to comply to do things that he wants. So when it comes to the other women, do you have a discussion with him about something like that, or are you internalizing it? And like, how are you processing everything and moving forward through all of this stuff?
There was so much to process. I mentioned that to him once. I was like, I'm processing this relationship 100 times more than I've ever processed any relationship. And I think that I tried sometimes, but I was really stonewalled each time, with like, you're the problem, or that isn't a real thing. I was gaslit, where I would immediately feel like the relationship was going to just like blow up, And so I had to make this intense decision of like, do I confront him or do I lose everything? And that's what it felt like. It felt like the relationship was always on life support, basically. And at some point, I did reach out to some psychological experts and tried to figure out like what was wrong with him. Why was I having so much trouble? And I got answers, but I didn't accept them, I think, because I really wanted to see if I could bring back out that sweet man that I thought was buried underneath. And there was one time in particular where my hope was renewed. We went out to dinner on a date, and we came back and I gave him a Thai massage, which he really loved. And he just totally relaxed for the first time ever. I'd never really seen him relax. His body always seemed like super guarded. And he just came out. He was like soft and present for the first time ever. And I just really deeply spiritually connected with him. I do believe that moment was real, but unfortunately, it kept me in the relationship much too long. And I realized later that although it may have been like a momentary breakthrough, it was really just a glimpse, and I wouldn't ever see that glimpse again.
So after sitting here and listening to everything, trying to figure out here, what does he actually want from you? So do you have an opinion of that?
I think really he wanted quite a few things. And I actually confronted him and I asked him, "What do you want from me?" And he said, "Oh, I thought maybe I wanted to give you a job, like you would be my assistant." And I knew that was totally wrong. That was not anything that we had continued to discuss at all. But there were things that were very clear. One, I think he wanted to be perfectly honest, like a sex slave, like somebody that he could call at any time and that would be there because he was obviously addicted to sex. I think he wanted a front of like a really good person. And he mentioned that his friends liked me and that I was really good at being kind to them and generous and getting along with people. And I think that made him look good or safe, including to like women that he was thinking about dating. He would sometimes introduce me to them and they would say, well, one of them in particular said, "Yeah, I feel safer now that Athena's coming." Um, and then I think at a deeper level, and this is why he probably never really let go, in addition to just wanting to feel control, I think I did tap into something really deep and was really good with intimacy. And later he would accuse me of that, of like making him feel this like level of intimacy he hadn't felt and then kind of letting him just drop. So yeah. And then I started to see really concerning signs of sadism. I don't think I'd ever been in a relationship with somebody who was sadistic, and some of those events would be like he would intentionally trigger trauma responses. He would use my mom's death as kind of like a dog whistle when he wanted to control me. And then he would say things like, "I enjoy the terror," because I'd like start crying or screaming, and he would actually get off on it. And the first time he said, "I enjoy the terror," I was really thrown off. And he would do these little pranks to create anxiety. And I've heard other abusive partners do these commonly, but he would like hide my keys on occasion. And then I would find them in places where he obviously had hid them from me. He would move the pin on Google Maps when we were supposed to meet up. And sometimes I would drive around for an hour to several hours looking for him. And he would say, "Oh, there, no, can't you see the pin?" And I would be all stressed and show up. And then he would soothe me again. I remember one time, actually a couple times, he would invite me on a trip and I would drive, I don't know, hours to get there. And then he would say, "They said you can't come," or "I have a big delay, I'm still working on this project." And I would just have to sit and wait and figure out what to do with myself. And initially I thought that he was a very empathic kind of guy because he would listen a lot and he would physically like soothe me, cuddle me, and hug me when I was going through things. And he was even like very accessible. Like I could call him in the middle of the night and he would answer the call and talk to me if I was having a hard time. But I started to realize that this might actually be fake empathy. And I didn't understand what that was at the time, but I started to see the signs. One night I was extremely ill with an infection that he actually gave me. And we were talking on the phone for, I don't know, 30 minutes. And I almost died while I was on the call. And after talking to him for a bit more, I realized he was out at dinner with some friends about 20 minutes away. And I thought he was out of state. And that's why he hadn't come or called the ambulance, or tried to help. And he didn't change course at all. He just said, "I got to go back to dinner." And later he told me he actually really thought that I was going to die that night. Another time we were driving separately and I stopped at this park on the way to meet with him, and this police officer pulled me over and questioned me as I was leaving, and he misread my plates. He thought my car was stolen. And so the cop pulled a gun on me and I screamed while I was on the phone with my ex, and I hung up the phone to deal with the cop. And then about, I don't know, I would say like 30 minutes later, I arrived at the camper where we were staying together. And he said, "I thought you were being raped. I'm glad you're okay." And then he faked being upset and he like threw himself down on the camper bed and started being dramatic and pretending like he was upset and empathic, like as if he was a scene from a movie, but he had no emotion whatsoever on his face and really no emotion in his voice. And he didn't try to call the police or come and try and find me or anything. He just said he thought that I was being assaulted and didn't do anything, but just went back to his work meeting. He also faked positive feelings. Like the first time, maybe the only time he ever told me he loved me, it seemed really staged. And it was on the same day that this woman had accused him of being a sexual predator. And I think he was worried I might find out. So he started to tell me about it. And then we went on this nice date. And then as we were splitting off, he walked across the street and he looked back at me and he said, "I love you, Athena." And I just didn't believe him at all. It again seemed like kind of a movie script. And I said, "What did you say?" And I said, "Okay, I love you too." But I just didn't believe it at all. Some people might, at this point think, okay, maybe he's just like an insensitive jerk. Or I think he did have Asperger's as well. And so I kind of wrote it off because of that too. But there were growing signs that, maybe he wasn't just an insensitive jerk. Maybe he was dangerous and possibly violent. The second to the last time I saw him, I was planning to break it off and I wanted to just be friends. So we met up and we were going to this hot springs place and he said, when I first showed up, he said, "Are we going to do this or not?" And seemed really angry and like just wanting sex. And I said I just wanted to cuddle and talk. And he was really frustrated by that. So he started to bring up this incident I had told him about where this massage therapist did sexually inappropriate things with me. And then he started to actually do those things to me to traumatize me and then soothe me and then push for sex again. And it worked. And I thought it was really creepy. I even called him out on it. But it turned out that day he knew he had contracted hepatitis A having unprotected sex with somebody else and then gave it to me as an STD. And I thought I had contracted HIV. Thank God I didn't. But, the whole thing was just like the coercion and the non-disclosure and then telling me like right in the middle of sex that he had unprotected sex with somebody else. Felt like a huge violation of boundaries. There was another time when we split off in Colorado. And I think the woman that I had spoke of that said he was a sexual predator, I reached out to her and she said that he had actually sexually assaulted her and sexually harassed her. And he said that it was a misunderstanding and that she was just trying to get money out of it. But she did seem scared. And when I talked to her that time months later, she said that she was actually afraid for her life. And, she said, "Is he here in Hawaii?" And I said, "I think he might be coming to Hawaii." She was like, "Maybe I have to leave." And yeah, she just seemed absolutely terrified. And she had a lawsuit against him and ended up dropping it out of fear. There were other times where he would just say things like he wanted to hire a hitman to get revenge on his friends for not paying him back. And he showed me this music video called "Break Your Kneecaps." It could just be like a coincidence. But, you start to notice this accumulation of things and think, okay, maybe this guy really is kind of a violent predator. And then one time he showed me out of the blue, he was just standing in the camper and he reached his hands out and showed me how to strangle somebody in like a really effective way so that they just drop to the ground. And I think initially I was in shock when he said these things, but I kind of blew them off and then just stashed them in the back of my mind. It's like, okay, I can't deal with this right now, but maybe subconsciously I should pay attention to them. And so then went to Colorado and then we split off. And I think I mentioned earlier, there was a woman that called him a sexual predator. And I ended up reaching out to the woman. I had met her in Colorado and she claimed that she was assaulted and sexually harassed by him. And I asked him about it and he said it was a misunderstanding and that she was probably just trying to get money out of him from a lawsuit. But she seemed really scared and she said that, she asked me if he was coming to Hawaii and that she was afraid for her life and really that she thought he was a psychopath. And she ended up dropping a lawsuit that she had against him out of fear. And then when we returned to California, we met up in Berkeley and he was showing me some photos from a trip. And he ended up showing me this gallery of sex photos on his phone that looked really concerning. And I was pretty traumatized by that. I did try to reach out to a mutual friend of ours, but I couldn't find her number. And I think I was just too scared of dealing with my own health stuff and like, what the hell do you do with that? And later I would file a police report about it. But at the time, I didn't even know how to deal with this level of craziness. And I think in the back of my mind, I was really starting to grow fearful of him. And so when we would talk, I would start to hide my location from him. And he would ask where I was very persistently. And I would start to lie or give like really vague answers, like I'm just at a retreat center, or I would say I was in another town nearby, but I wouldn't actually tell him where I was. And then the last time we met, it was pretty terrifying. We met at his mom's house again, coming full circle, and I was at his camper, and he would leave me alone in the camper, just like without anything to do for 8 to 12 hours a day, and then triangulate me with other women and just like demean me in various ways. And by the end of this, I was crying, and he seemed to get really excited by the crying, and his eyes turned black, and he got this crazy grin on his face. And I just saw the predator in him, and I thought that he was going to murder me. So that night, I left in the middle of the night, turned my GPS off, and I didn't talk to him for a few days. And this guy, who was an employee and a close friend of his, contacted me and warned me about him. And then he fired the friend. And in the fall of 2022, I was starting to process all of this, and I went on a shamanic journey and I had this really sweet vision of holding him as a baby. But then in the middle of the vision, I said to myself, I am the baby too. And I talked to somebody about it and realized, okay, I was putting his inner child as like woundedness above mine or before mine. And a few weeks later, I had this epiphany that I was choosing his love over like my own internal power and emotion over reason. I started to have kind of this flood of epiphanies about the relationship and how I was trapped in it. And though it felt like I was ripping out my heart, I started to send him text feeling into the separation. And in the middle of this conversation, I was in my car, and this group of men came and blocked me into a parking spot and started to try and carjack my car a couple times. And I set my alarm off, but the phone signal was jammed and I couldn't call the police. And so after that happened, like because my phone signal wasn't working, I contacted him like a couple hours later, and I told him what happened. And then he stopped responding for the first time ever. And he didn't respond for months. And I realized I don't know. I will never know if he called somebody to do that. But I did start to think, wow, I might be more likely to die with this guy than without him. And so I went no contact and I moved to Joshua Tree, California. And I had a friend there, but I didn't really have a place to land or a job. And I actually had COVID, but I took the leap and I started to kind of pull my life together. And a few weeks later, my website was vandalized with sexual ads. And the website company couldn't figure out who got in or how it happened. But then somebody started stalking me from different numbers. And although I called the police and they said, well, that could be anybody, this had never happened before. And the stalking messages were kind of sweet, like little check ins, like, how are you doing? I miss you. And they were kind of annoying and sometimes scary, but I think they kept me emotionally connected to him much longer than I would have, because I couldn't block them. They kept coming from Telegram and text and phone and other means, even Facebook through different accounts. And I tried to reach out to the police and like domestic violence centers and even his close friends to help intervene and like get him help or like stop him or file a restraining order or something like that. And nobody would help because basically he was too smart and he was doing it from these like covert means. But then I started to get counseling and I slowly started to heal, and I was becoming pretty successful at like rebuilding my life and my health. And then in 2024, we made contact again over a text. It was another one of these, stalking texts from a different number, but I expressed concern for his mental health and he reached back through his own account. And so I sent him a gift of massage, which sounds crazy, but I had sort of like calmed down about the stalking and just wanted to help. And series of things happened and I realized he just had no conscience. He was lying about stuff again, things that he was responsible for, and I just couldn't trust him. And I realized he didn't really care if I lived or died at all, and that I was protecting him over me and other victims. And I ended up calling the police and filing a police report finally and told them about it. And I actually told him about it too. And then the day before my deposition, my bank account was hacked. And then the day of the deposition, I got a Facebook message from another account on the spiritual singles group, and it said, hi, and then it said his name. And he was sort of claiming the attack, I believe. And a month later, well, the police did nothing. But then a month later, my boss met with him. I don't know how they connected, but I lost my job. And then in August 2025, I moved to Southern Oregon, trying to start over yet again, and also trying to like I guess, hide my location. I ended up in this very sweet community with like healer type people and started to really, I don't know, come into, I think, more of my ideal self, my fully alive self. And I started to get this flurry of Telegram messages from a stalker again. And I said I didn't want to talk to him. I didn't love him. And that this was really the end. I think this triggered rage and control in him. And my phone was totally hacked to death. I don't know if it was him for sure. I will never know, but it was bricked pretty much. It like just wouldn't even turn on. And then finally just kind of came back to life on its own. And then things started to escalate much more. In winter of 2025, I was staying in this rural New Mexico community, and I left a Google review for their community business. And soon after that, I saw his camper on a very remote road next to the community I was staying at, really out in the middle of nowhere. And I called the police and told them that I was starting to fear for my life. After that, I left the community and they kind of went cold and didn't tell me why. And I tried to stay at a number of other places, and they all would say that they were contacted by someone and said that person had bad things to say about me. One of the people I saw in the text messages that somebody had told them that I was going to steal her dog. And another place I stayed on Facebook Marketplace said that he had heard from my friends that I hated men and I wanted to spread fear. So things just started to get really weird. And I was in San Francisco and I was thinking about moving to Colorado and just like totally starting over yet again. And as I was driving east, all my devices were hacked and all my accounts were hacked. My email was repeatedly hacked, text, Facebook, my Lyft account was hacked, and somebody cloned my number and attached their account to mine. And then just for 2 months, I was relentlessly hacked and my bank account was closed. They said I committed fraud and I lost my whole savings. And due to the surveillance, I thought I was under some kind of legal investigation. And that was probably the most fear I've ever felt. It was like I was being attacked from multiple places. I talked to this private investigator and he thought that this ex that I've been speaking about was the only real potential suspect. And I contacted the police. I filed multiple reports and they just kind of blew me off, which was kind of terrifying. And then I started to notice that he had reached out to some of my friends and they would try to tell me not to pursue criminal charges against him and also empathize with him like, oh, he's just a wounded guy and he probably just needs a caregiver and maybe you should sue him, but you shouldn't file a police report. And then I would quickly break off the relationship with these people. And some of them had been friends for quite a while, like mutual friends of ours. And I started not to leave the house. I started to notice, I thought people were following me by my phone signal, which sounds kind of paranoid, but apparently they can do that. And then let's say in June, I started to report these episodes to the FBI. And I also contacted his company that he had started and he was still working at. And I began to receive death threats via LinkedIn. And they started with all this concern and personalized questions and then started to ask about like, oh, did I have police protection? And they escalated into threats of stalking, murder, and false imprisonment. And these messages were directly responding to posts on the LinkedIn and direct texts and emails to his personal accounts to get him to stop in timing and in content. And this is when I was able to get a restraining order.
So this is a lot to deal with in post-separation, a very scary situation. So even though you get this restraining order here, what happens to you after this happens? What's going on with your nervous system here? Because a restraining order is a restraining order, but that doesn't mean something still can't happen or that fear goes away.
I mostly dealt with it by just not leaving the house and trying to deal with the legal stuff piece by piece, which has been a lot. And then starting to get into therapy. I was actually having trouble getting therapists to stick because they thought that the case was too severe and they didn't know how to deal with it. But I went back to some old therapists who I had talked to before about the abuse, and they've been very helpful. And so I've started to work through that anxiety and the trauma. I would say particularly of being stalked was something that I had never experienced anything like that. And it was, the fear was much more intense than when I was in the relationship.
So with all that fear and trauma, even though you are out, how do you finally break free emotionally from him? And it feels like you're also back at square one again. So how did you go about rebuilding your life again?
part of it was breaking the trauma bond finally and not protecting him. And I think even going forward with the legal stuff was something that he definitely tried to dissuade me from in various ways. And I agreed with that, because I felt this connection to his wounded child and I didn't want to harm him. But I had to give up on that and stop my attempts to rescue, diagnose, and understand him, reform him, and really just go full on and holding him accountable to the extent possible. And it may not be possible to fully hold him accountable, but I realize, the only safety is like totally leaving, cutting contact, which I wish I had done years ago, but now I get a chance to do. I have to start to learn to trust my intuition again with new people, because like a lot of trust was broken with other people who supported him too. And now I'm like with my therapist starting to like really filter intensely for new friends and connections, for people that like have high integrity, and not giving people the benefit of the doubt the way I had been so trusting before, and like really open and initially very vulnerable and like really wanting intimacy. And I have to like really rein that in and wait until I know somebody super well. And then I've been also trying to like rebuild community, because I lost some communities through this. Like I had a spiritual community online and they just couldn't handle this. It was just too much for them. And also they may have been contacted. I don't know. I lost like an activist community. So I've had to find like new activist outlets for my passion, which I've started to do, and like really honing into not just like what is the kind of work I want to do or who do I want to ally with, but like what is the quality of that person or that community? Are they actually like really self-reflective and caring and kind and empathic, versus like, do I like them? Those are two very different questions, because I really liked this person, this ex. I liked so many things about him, but he was none of the things that I actually needed, which was like a caring, empathic, really high integrity person.
And if you had any words of wisdom for everyone listening, what would they be?
I would say the only safety with someone showing psychopathic traits is leaving. And I think just giving up hope that people will change, or that you can help them or love them into being a better person. People show you who they are, and it's much better to just take that at face value. When they start to lie, when they start to manipulate, they're not actually little red flags. Those are major boundary breaches. And when somebody's breaking your boundaries, that means they don't actually care about you.
Well, Athena, I really want to thank you for being here with us today, sharing your story. We are happy that you are alive here today to tell your story. You were dealing with someone who is a predator, who is really not a good person and was just capable of anything. And I know you wanted to really help people today by doing some little nitty-gritty details, and you did that to validate their experience. And I really can't thank you enough for being here with us today and sharing your story.
Yeah, thank you so much for letting me tell my story.
Well, thank you, Athena, once again. And if you want to be a guest like Athena was today, please do go to our website at narcissistapocalypse.com, fill out our guest form, and we'll go from there. Also at our website, we have a support group with Zoom meetings every Wednesday nights, Thursday afternoons, and Saturday nights. And we have forum boards for you to post on to get the validation that you need from survivors just like you. And we also have a newsletter at our website. And when you sign up to our newsletter, you get a free reflection workbook for every new survivor story. And that is a weekly newsletter, all at narcissistapocalypse.com. And that is it for today's survivor story. So for myself and Athena, we hope you have a good night.